Hello! A number of years ago, a friend of mine passed away while attempting to make the impossible turn. What is it about? Let's imagine a single engine private plane lining up on a runway, accelerating to take off and then lifting 20, 30, 40 meters into the air. The runway ends beneath the plane, and then suddenly the engine stops. The engine has failed, it stops. So, what happens is that a lot of pilots give in to the temptation to turn back. To make a 90-degree turn, actually, is not even a 180-degree turn. Because if you take off from a runway and make a 180-degree turn, you actually end up parallel to it. You don't come back to the same runway. You need to turn more than 180 degrees, then make another turn to align with the runway axis. When you're at low altitude and have little speed, this has been called the impossible turn because every year it kills people. There are people who have survived it. That's what sometimes fuels fantasies, the temptation to try it yourself. Let me tell you a story. During airplane evacuations, it was found that passengers sometimes also have this temptation. Look, they board using the front door. Very often the plane is parked and there's an air bridge attached. And then everyone boards through the front door, including the passengers who end up sitting in row 35. And what we've sometimes noticed is that in the panic of an evacuation, people, no matter where they're sitting, sometimes tend to want to exit through the door they entered from. It's natural and instinctive. We entered through that door, so if I need to evacuate, I'll exit the same way. Yet, very often there are emergency exits, escape routes that are much closer. It's the same with this pilot taking off. He's sure from experience there's a runway, so if the engine fails, he plans to turn back to it. He often loses his life trying to do that. We're heading to Lake Placid, New York in October 2023. We have a Cessna Type 177 retractable gear. That means retractable gear. It's what we call the Cessna Cardinal among ourselves. Cessnas are a bit like Audis. They all look alike, just some are a bit bigger than others and have more powerful engines. So the Cessna 177 is, let's say, intermediate. It can comfortably carry 4 people. Today we have a photography operation. We have 2 planes that will take off in formation. The first one to take off is a Biff craft from which we've removed a door. And then right there in the doorway, a photographer is set up. This plane doesn't concern us. It's going to take off first. It has to photograph the Cessna 77 for a magazine. In the Cessna, there are 2 guys. We have a pilot. The pilot is a big guy. He's a former National Football League champion in the United States, and next to him is another big guy who's also quite well known in the United States. He's a fighter pilot, an aviation security consultant, someone very active. He was once the vice president of the American Pilots Association. So all in all, we have some high caliber people here. Let's just say when he stops to do what's called a run-up, well, at a certain point. Witnesses, including the Beechcraft pilot, saw this. It's that at the moment when the Cessna's engine is being tested, it stops. Small planes, when they have only one engine, are at a big disadvantage in the event of an engine failure during takeoff, quite simply. Unlike twin-engine planes, which can fly and land on one engine, single-engine planes can't. It ends up gliding with an extremely short distance. So that's why it's very critical to check the engine before every takeoff. That's the check we do. We do this because they have 2 ignition systems. Usually both systems have ignition on. We switch it to just one system. The revolutions per minute drops a little. We put it back on both. Then we switch it to the other system. They're numbered 1, 2, or left and right, and we have to make sure the revolutions per minute doesn't drop too much. When we go to just one system, which means both are working, we also check the difference between the 2. And then there's another test, which is the idle test. We take the throttle lever, reduce it completely, and depending on the engines, they should hold at around 1,700 revolutions per minute. Well, during that test, the propeller stops. That's never good, but something failed. we do that before leaving. It's a go or a no-go. That means if the engine fails this test for any reason, that's it, we won't go. It's over, done, we come back and then we check with the mechanics. They'll figure it out. It's their job, it's their problem. They'll find out what happened with the engine. Sadly, this is being respected less and less. A few years ago, I visited an aero club in the United Kingdom. Cessna. Looks like the 177 but smaller, with just 2 seats for 2 people. Well, I remember I was with one of the club's pilots. He gets to the holding point, he idles, he pulls the throttle all the way back, and at that moment the engine stops. What does he do? Oh yes, the spark plugs are fouled. He restarts, he throttles up, then he starts to reduce. He had found a trick. He starts to lean the engine mixture until it almost stops. Then he puts it back. He does this several times in a row to clean and clear out the engine. That's very nice, but we still have a logo. The story of the run-up. It's not for troubleshooting. It's not to understand what's wrong. It's not to find a solution. If it doesn't work, we start over. You must be stubborn and disciplined. Aviation. Just as there are things it's good to think about, there are also things that experts, experienced pilots have been thinking about for a very long time. It's better to accept them as they are. Unfortunately, we're going to find a lot of people who will go beyond that. So in this specific case, in the case we're interested in, the engine had a problem and then it was ignored and then he decided to keep going. So what will happen? We have this pilot and his passenger, I was saying that both are experienced. And then what's going to happen is that they're going to accelerate down the runway to take off. So they accelerate, and then they start to lift off the ground and climb a little. So witnesses see them climbing, surveillance cameras or cameras on doors of homes around the airport see the plane climbing, but it won't climb for long. It comes, it passes the runway threshold and starts turning left. The left turn was part of its initial plan. To follow, recall the Beechcraft that took off earlier. And at that moment, the engine lost power, so it doesn't stop completely. Sometimes these engines, when they fail, they have several modes of failure. Sometimes it stops suddenly, and other times it doesn't. However, the revolutions per minute drops quickly, and it stops delivering thrust. The propeller can keep spinning, especially since it's pushed by the relative wind, so the propeller keeps spinning. There's noise, but it doesn't pull at all. All right, so that's the kind of failure they had. So what does the pilot want to do? Well, he wants to turn around to come back and land on the runway. So here, that's what we call the impossible turn. It's impressive because he's very experienced. 9,000 flight hours to his credit. His passenger was a fighter pilot, was an instructor, all that. He flew F-15S and everything. So you expect better judgment, but despite that, he decides to turn back. Another issue they faced that day was the center of gravity being too far forward. It's pretty crazy because we have a Cessna. They put in fuel, the tank was 2/3 full. Okay, the 2 guys sat in the front, they closed the doors. They were 1.5 inches forward, further forward than the forward limit of the center of gravity. That's terrible, actually. It often happens with Cessnas or light aircraft. In this way, all it takes is 2 guys, like in this specific case, 2 pretty strong guys sitting in the front. On top of that, the cockpit is relatively far forward compared to the wing, so the center of gravity goes beyond acceptable limits. What does that mean in practice? It actually means this. That's what it means. A plane whose nose tends to drop, the nose tends to quickly go below the horizon during landing. It can be quite difficult to flare because the more speed you lose, the more you need to pull back on the stick to keep the nose up. But if the center of gravity is too far forward with normal landing speeds, you can have the stick pulled all the way back and the nose still tends to drop, right? Another thing, and this might be the least intuitive part, it increases a bad forward center of gravity, like this one increases the stall speed. It means the plane stalls more easily, so it might seem counterintuitive, but why does it stall more easily? Should I tell you why? Actually, imagine this. Imagine two Cessnas flying side by side, and one of them has an incorrect center of gravity. The center of gravity is too far forward, outside the limits. Both slow down, both reduce the throttle and slow down to stabilize in level flight. What will you notice on this Cessna with the wrong center of gravity compared to the other? You will notice that the pilot used much more stick, pulled much more on the stick to prevent the nose from dropping below the horizon. When you pull on the stick, what happens? The elevator goes up. On the Cessna, the whole horizontal stabilizer at the back moves. That's just how it is. Downforce, so to compensate for this bad center of gravity, we need to use a stronger downforce on the horizontal stabilizer at the back. So if we want to stay in the air, well, we have to increase the angle of attack to get more lift, to compensate for what we've done at that point. At the same speed, the plane stalls more easily. So there are only negative aspects to that. In this specific case, what they should have done is go to the club, take a travel bag, put some heavy books in it, books like that, fill it up to 20 kilos, and then go all the way to the back and put it in there. But, well, they didn't think of it. People often overlook the center of gravity in small planes, assuming it's fine when it's not. What will happen? Well, during the turn, in addition, the tilt means it takes off with little speed. He starts making this impossible turn, and then during the turn, what will happen? Stall speed increases during turns, making stalls more likely. If you have enough margin, it's okay. Every day, planes make turns without stalling, but you need to have some margin to make a turn without stalling. If your speed is borderline, well, you're going to pay for it, so what will happen? It's gonna stall and then suddenly go down. It hits the ground, it falls into a ravine not far from the airport. By the way, very often what happens with these planes is that they end up crashing. Usually they finish part of their turn and then they stall and fall. Usually when they fall, they're facing the runway, but what happens next depends on the varying distance. Those who are lucky can survive, get roughed up, the plane destroyed, and survive. Those who aren't lucky, who is the majority really? Statistically speaking, most pilots will unfortunately die because they will stall and fall to the ground. Brutally then, the plane hits nose first, it ends up in the ravine, smashed completely. Sadly, both men aboard died. To tell you that you can have extremely experienced pilots, but that doesn't prevent mistakes, it doesn't prevent panic, it doesn't prevent a sudden move. Last minute then, both pilots are killed. The National Transportation Safety Board arrives at the scene. The problem is that these planes, since they don't have a flight recorder and all that, it's very, very difficult to understand what happened. The Lycoming engine likely had a screw. It's a 4-cylinder engine, but when they remove the spark plugs, there are 8, which is normal for 4 cylinders. You'll see all 8. Aircraft engines have 2 spark plugs per cylinder, so there are twice as many spark plugs as cylinders. The spark plugs are fine. By the way, the engine had been overhauled 72 hours before this problem, before this accident. Typically, 72 hours isn't much for that engine. But there was a problem that was never found by the Transportation Safety Board since the engine is wrecked. We can't restart it to see. But there was an issue with Mr. and Boules de Gomme. We'll never know what that issue was. The settings were good, the flaps were good, everything was correct, but the engine gave out. And when they did a spectrographic analysis of the camera noises, they saw that it was at about 1150 revolutions per minute. For your information, a Cessna, when you take off and go full throttle, the needle, usually the red line on Cessnas, is around 1,700 revolutions per minute, so 2,700. It's really when you have takeoff thrust, 2,100. You don't have much, 2,100. It's Hennis who's really spinning in the wind. Anyway, thank you for watching this episode, and thanks to those who support this channel. Patreon, or by subscribing to the Cockpit Club, the paid section of this channel, to watch exclusive videos. Please subscribe to show your support. Most viewers of this channel aren't subscribed according to the statistics I check occasionally. So, subscribe to show me to prove that you like my work and to encourage me to make the next video. Thank you very much. And then I'll see you in the next one.